All right, guys, I just want to welcome back to the Everything College Football podcast. Today, me and Nick will be breaking down a mega clash in the Big Ten. A lot on the line here with Michigan traveling to University Park to take on Penn State. 6.5-point line in favor of Michigan. 48.5 is the total. 12 p.m. Eastern time on Fox. Looking at this Michigan offense, there's a lot going on in the Michigan program right now, Nick. A lot of people consider them to be the best team in college football. Obviously, they've not really played much of a schedule up until this point, and they have Penn State and Ohio State still on the horizon. So plenty of opportunities for them to prove themselves. Obviously, in the background, you kind of have this, alleged cheating scandal with sign stealing going on. And we won't talk about the specifics here today, Nick, but I just kind of want to get your opinion on what kind of distraction this will be for the program. Do you think it'll phase them at all now until they have a big road test on Saturday?
I certainly think it has to be considered a distraction. Connor Stalions resigned, was fired, let go earlier in the week. Whatever story you want to read, some people say that he was resigned, some people say he was fired, whatever you want to say, however you want to spin it, you want to look at it. Obviously, it is distraction. This has been a scandal that I think has really divided college football, because normally when big scandals come out, it's pretty consensus what people feel. But I feel like this is one of the scandals where there is a lot of differing opinions. Some people, like myself, think it's a very serious issue and that it's something that needs to be taken seriously by the NCAA. And other people, especially Michigan alums and other supporters of just football in general, do not feel it's a big issue. Dave Portnoy of Barstool, Michigan alum, is a big proponent of saying how this is not really an issue at all and this means nothing. I think there is a lot more here than we really fully understand, and it continues to divulge. But I think it's got to be a distraction. You're heading on the road. I've said it before on this podcast multiple times that it is a very tough place to play at Penn State. Happy Valley is very loud. It's a shame the game's at noon. If it was at night, I think that would be even more of a factor. It is very tough to play at Beaver Stadium, 107,000 seats in that stadium for a reason. It's a very, very loud, rough atmosphere. We've seen it in the past. I think you got to be just focused if you're Michigan. Keep your head on straight here. Harbaugh's been doing a good job of that, but this is a tough distraction. If I was a Michigan player, I would certainly be distracted by this news.
It's certainly distracting away from how good this offense has been this year, especially J.J. McCarthy completing about 76%, 2,100 yards through the air, 18 touchdowns, 3 picks. I mean, he's just been flawless this season. 3 rushing touchdowns as well. Last year, some bumpy starts for him, especially the last one against TCU where he had 2 pick sixes and didn't play his best game. Pretty bumpy altogether last season. Overall, it was a good year. I think he's really showcasing some, maturity this season. And he's going to have to do that again on Saturday. Is he going to be this polished, going on the road to Penn State? This receiving group for him, they're not the most talented. They don't have the most speed, but they certainly are good when it comes to being technicians and, route running. Cornelius Johnson, 422 yards and a touchdown. He's a good jump ball guy, nice physical pass catcher. Roman Wilson, love his abilities in the short yard. 589 and 10 touchdowns for him. Tight end Colston Loveland, a big fan of his. Second on the team at 27 receptions, 419 yards, 4 scores for him. And then a bit of a drop-off. After that's Donovan Edwards, who hasn't been much of a factor for this team this year. A.J. Barner at tight end. So they're not all that deep at receiver, Nick. And, that's something we kind of talked about in the preseason. They really haven't, impressed in that area. But the top 3 guys, they're being productive for J.J. McCarthy. He's putting it on them. They're, 55% on third down. This is a team that stays on the field. Again, they haven't played the toughest of competition. So how do you think they're going to do now that they face one of the best secondary in college football?
I think J.J. McCarthy has to get more love for the Heisman race. 75.7% completion percentage, 2,100 yards, passing, 18 scores, 3 interceptions. I think McCarthy needs to get more attention in the Heisman race. He's having an incredible season that I think is being overshadowed, mostly due to the strength of opponent. I think is certainly why it's getting overshadowed when you look at guys like Michael Penix, who is putting up similar numbers against better opponents in the Pac-12. Michigan, they played a very, very, very weak non-conference, roughly the same as Georgia. Their strength schedule was 107, 108, something like that. Georgia's also in the hundreds. So I think that's part of the reason why McCarthy's not getting a whole lot of love. He is doing it with, talent-wise below average receivers who are stepping up. You noted the third down conversion rate is a very impressive rate for this offense, which is important. They stay on the field, which is a really important stat when you want to look at it. I think Michigan is producing when they need to. They have good balance in the passing and running game. They have a solid offense through and through with a guy like McCarthy, who's a veteran who leads this team. He stepped in. He knows what he's doing. He gets the ball to his receivers, Wilson, Cornelius Johnson, Colston Loveland. So they spread the ball out, Donovan Edwards in the passing game as well. I think this team has very good balance on offense, and they can put up a lot of points in a hurry. They scored 41 against Purdue, 49 against Michigan State, 52 against Indiana and Minnesota. So this team can certainly score in bunches when they have to.
Just looking at this running game, they certainly have not been as dominant this year, and obviously a lot of other stuff going on in college football. and with Michigan that this isn't getting enough, attention. Donovan Edwards only 232 yards this year, only about 8 yards per carry. He's not really been efficient though. I'm not gonna sit here and act like I've seen every Michigan game this year, but I did watch those non-conference games early in September, 3 weeks in a row. They were efficient, but they weren't very effective. They didn't top 180 in any of those games. Last 3 weeks, they haven't been efficient at all. 3.2, 3.5 yards per carry the last 2 weeks. And, I think they're certainly trying, 34 plus carries in the last 3 games. They had a $163 against Indiana, 3 scores. They have 25 touchdowns on the year running. That's certainly still their identity at the goal line. They still want to pound the rock. They've just not been that great this year, Nick. Only 2 games of 200 plus rushing. Nebraska, they, belted them for 249, 3 scores. But I think this is kind of concerning, looking at how they've done it. Obviously, if this wasn't the entire body of work, we could just talk about how they're just kind of getting their way through the weeks, staying healthy and whatnot. I don't think that's really the case, though. Michigan certainly, I think they're trying to run the ball. They just have not been able to. Blake Corum, 649, 16 touchdowns. I mean, he's still able to do his work at the goal line, right? But only 167 as a team. This is a far cry from where they were a season ago because they certainly were trying to run with the same volume. They were just piling it on opponents, including this Penn State team. They put 418 yards on a season ago. Seemed to week in, week out, they're putting 250 on the board running the ball. Has not been the case this year against weaker opponents. And I think this is still a great offensive line led by the Stanford transfer Drake Nugent, having an All-American type season. Trevor Keegan is really good for them at guard. I love Zach Zenter as well. He's probably their second best run blocker. Miles Hinton coming over, playing some at that tackle position. Trente Jones as well. So they've been kind of bouncing it out a little bit at right tackle. How concerned are you with this running game, though? Because some of the things I just said, this is a great offensive line, a great experience, nice size, plenty of leadership. But Edwards has not been effective at all. Blake Corum's only really did his damage at the goal line.
It is certainly an issue to look at. Corum has the 16 touchdowns, but like you said, it's really just goal line situation, 649 for him. You expected more out of Corum and Edwards. We boasted in the preseason saying this could be the nation's best backfield, the best 1-2 punch from a running back duo, and we just have not seen that. This unit has not been able to produce. They've really struggled. I don't know if it's on the offensive line. Maybe it's potentially a change in play calling, different decision making, whatever it is. They've struggled against weak opponents here, and then they play a Penn State defensive line that is a very talented unit that can certainly get in the backfield and stuff you if they have to. This is definitely a tough matchup for Michigan. You're gonna have to find a way to win the battle in the trenches and win the battle on the ground if they want to win this game against Penn State, who have a very good defensive line that are a very physical unit if they're playing at full health and full potential.
Beginning of last year, we said J.J. McCarthy would probably put them over the edge. Typical Michigan, they're really good at running the football when it comes to throwing the football, though they were never really good and didn't play complementary football. The tide has certainly shifted. Now this is a new school Michigan look. They do have nice tight ends. A.J. Barner and Max Bredesen are really good run blockers, so they can go heavy and bunch, and they can pick up short yardages. And I guess if that's the way you got to win games, that's fine. If you're able to pick up yards through the air. I think for Michigan right now, a little concerned with, the run game kind of trending backwards. They face a tremendous front. Look at the Penn State offense. Going into the game in Columbus, I said, I don't think this team's going to be able to score even 10 points. And a lot of people thought that was just a disrespectful comment, and it ended up being pretty true. 12 points total. They only ended up getting a score on that last drive. It was pretty much garbage time. That ended up also being their only third down conversion of the game, and they were just abysmal. What was it, 1 for 15, a 6% conversion rate on third down, Nick. Percent total on the year. And then Indiana offense really struggled once more to run the football. Drew Aller, though, they really unleashed him, though, late in that game. He was able to lead them downfield quickly, game-winning touchdown. And his confidence and poise really has seemed to really been much more improved these past 2 weeks. 3 touchdowns, 210 against Indiana, 240 and 4 scores on the road at Maryland. One of the points I'd made for the Ohio State games, how poor they'd been on the road, and he was able to go into College Park and just tear them apart. So they're really unleashing them a little bit, it seems, Nick. And, they don't really have the greatest of speed in their receiving core. Dante Cephas finally got involved, though, catching his first 2 touchdowns of the year. The Penn State transfer, a season high in receptions with 6 and 53 yards. So he was able to get involved in this passing attack for once. Keandre Lambert-Smith, he's been very consistent past couple of weeks. 3 straight 50-yard games, 6+ receptions in all those games. He's going to be the leader for them in the receiving core. Love these tight ends and Theo Johnson, Tyler Warren. These guys can be effective anywhere, in the middle of the field, in the red zone, third and fourth and shorts, combined 10 touchdowns between those 2 guys. Harrison Wallace, he's probably the more speedy one. Hasn't been much of a factor this year. He's likely going to be questionable for this game, so we're not sure if he's going to play. Penn State does not have the speed, Nick. Drew Aller, this is a player, former 5-star, who can certainly rip it and be accurate, and that's exactly what you need sometimes to kind of, get past the lack of talent at the receiving core. But I think they have a nice combo here for Aller to work with, at least at a home game against a tough opponent.
outside of the game against Ohio State, this offense has looked good. 41 points against Northwestern, 63 against UMass, 33 against Indiana, and 51 this past weekend against Maryland, really dominating against Maryland. Jeweler, we thought he was going to be a really star quarterback. We knew he had the potential coming in, a highly recruited player out of high school. Has not looked to where I thought he was going to be. I think some people were talking about him potentially as a Heisman sleeper. I didn't know if you wanted to buy in then, but I thought you should definitely take a look at him, considering the odds were pretty lengthy. Right now, 62% completion percentage is a little low than I was hoping for, just under 1,900 yards passing and 20 touchdowns to 1 interception, which is really the key ratios. The 20-to-1 ratio is fantastic. 1 interception, I mean, you really can't hate that. This is another player, another team here compared to Michigan where they don't really seem to have the extreme talent at wide receiver that you would like to see, like you see at Ohio State, like you see it at Alabama, Georgia, schools like that. Or these are just guys who work hard. Keandre Lambert-Smith is going to be your top dog at 645 and 4 touchdowns. Tyler Warren has 6 touchdown receptions as well, 216. Harrison Wallace, if he plays, that's a big player. Dante Cephas is a great player with 200 yards receiving and 2 scores. Theo Johnson, 4 touchdowns and 246. So I think Alaire looks good in the pocket. He's comfortable. You're really cutting down on the mistakes. He's kind of grown since that Ohio State game, even though it's only been 2 weeks. He's grown, in my opinion. He is getting a little bit better, more comfortable every single week. Now he's in the friendly confines at home in a really nice environment where it'll be dead silent. When he has the ball, he'll be able to focus and try and pick apart this Michigan defense.
Going back to the Ohio State game, big reason why I picked him to struggle so much on offense is because, Aller had not been great on the road, and then this running game had been stifled by tougher opponents, tougher defensive lines, and this is not really a good rushing attack. The backfield's phenomenal, right? We talked about that. Kaytron Allen, Nicholas Singleton, and then even Trey Potts as a, number 3. But I pumped to the brakes, before the season even started on this running game because of this offensive line. Olu Fashanu, he's great, but he's mainly just a star as a pass blocker and not so much as a run blocker. I like Cade Wallace at right tackle. I think they have some very sturdy tackles when it comes to pass blocking, but the interior, Sal Wormley, Hunter Norzad, these guys are not all that great when it comes to run blocking. And, that's been the case like we talked about in the preseason. And they've just not been good running the ball, outside of UMass and Delaware where they put up, pretty good numbers. Other than that, they've not been great. Yeah, they had 215 against Iowa on almost 60 carries. Only had 132 against Indiana. Watching that game, they could not run the ball. They were committed to it. They were trying to get it going. Only, $158 and 2 scores against Maryland. This is just not a good rushing offense, Nick, and it's hard to say that because this is a great backfield, but the offensive line struggles are clearly evident. Again, I think they're really sound in pass protection. That's going to be big here in this one. But they're going to be committed to the running game, 41.5 carries per game. That's what they're going to look to do, try to wear down a very good Michigan front. But they need to be more creative with this running game because these guys are very talented. They're tough, they're physical, they can make guys miss. Don't have like elite speed by any means with their bigger frames, but they're not very efficient one bit. And sometimes this effectiveness goes sideways as well.
Certainly an issue. You expected this running game to be better for Penn State. The offensive line, especially the interior, is letting me down. Fashanu is a fantastic pass blocker, going to be a top 10 pick in the draft, but his run blocking is not polished, and we've seen it this year. Kaytron Allen and Nicholas Singleton, we expected them to have more than the yards. They barely have 1,000 yards between the two of them. I thought we were going to get a lot more out of those guys. Allen, 4.8 yards per carry. Singleton, 4 yards per carry, 7 scores for him, 4 for Allen. I wanted to see more of this rushing attack. This rushing attack has really disappointed me. They're really not that explosive in the passing or on the ground, and I think that's a bad recipe for disaster for this Penn State team. They really seem to not have an explosive punch in either phases of the offense, and you really hope that one of those is going to break out. I figured it would be the running game. I didn't know if I trusted the wide receivers, and the running game has not quite been where we want it to be. And it's disappointing if you're a Penn State fan because you know how talented Allen and Singleton are. These guys are incredible backs that came out of high school with a lot of praise, and they just are not getting the blocks they need. The interior offensive line is certainly letting them down.
Yeah, I certainly think that running right into piles, slow developing run plays, that's something you can't really go with in this game. Bayou Prabula, the backup quarterback, he has 4 rushing touchdowns this year. That's certainly his bread and butter. I think some of that creativity will involve him getting involved, in short yardage. So we'll see what they do. I think that's really they need to be most sound is in short yardage, keep these drives alive. They don't need to go out here and put up 200-plus rushing. If they do that, they'll probably win the game. But it's hard to expect that now. But I certainly think week to week, you can probably count on them to be able to pick up some short yardage running in certain situations. Looking at the Michigan defense they're going to be facing, this is just a unit that's been great. And obviously, they have not played really anybody on this side of the ball. And you know what? Michigan fans are unhappy with you saying that. It's the truth, though. But one thing you do say is they will have opportunities to prove how good they are over the last couple of games since September 30th. The toughest offense they faced, probably Minnesota. They're averaging about 22 points per game. And they put up, they held them to 169 yards. So you still got to go out there and play good defense at the end of the day. And this is a team that's absolutely loaded on this side of the ball, especially in the trenches, led by Chris Jenkins, Mason Graham, Josiah Stewart, the Coastal Carolina transfer, Derek Moore. I mean, you got some players here who've been very good in, run defense and against the pass rush. Michael Barrett in his linebacking position has really been a star player for them. Junior Colson as well. I mean, this is a team that's flat out built to dominate against the run, and that's what they did for the last 2 years. Against TCU, they got flatlined really. That was the only game, though. It's pretty much an outlier over the past couple of years. Past 3, really. I think that's the only game they've allowed 200-plus rushing in. This has just been a phenomenal Michigan run defense, Nick, led by great linebackers and those defensive linemen that I alluded to. Ernest Hausman, the Nebraska transfer, has been involved a little bit as well. Not as loud as some of these other players. This defense, though, look what they're doing. They're first in total D, pass defense, fewest points per game, and then fewest plays. So they're able to get off the field, keeping these guys fresh, and that's going to be beneficial in a game like this. You got to go on the road. You're going to have to lean on guys to, be healthy and be sound. And against the Penn State offense that, again, went 1 for 15 on third downs against Ohio State, you're feeling pretty confident.
This is certainly a confident unit if you're a Michigan fan. This defense has been fantastic against the run. I think is a big matchup potential win here is that Penn State's been struggling to run the ball. Michigan's run defense is fantastic. Junior Colson, 49 total tackles, leading the team from linebacker. 2 tackles for loss. Michael Barrett, 33 total tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, plus a sack for him. Derek Moore, 23, 4 tackles for loss, 3 sacks for him. Josiah Stewart leads the way in sacks for the team of 4.5, 6.5 tackles for loss, 22 total tackles. Harold, McGregor, Benny, and Goody are all in that 15 to 20 tackles range. McGregor, 5.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack. Benny, 4 tackles for loss. Harold, 4.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. So these guys produce. They get in the backfield. They get tackles for loss when they need to. This is a very productive defense that is very solid. Number 1 in total D pass defense as well. Very good against the run as well. This is a very physical, strong defense, and you see it in the results the last couple of weeks. I know they're not playing great teams, but Purdue, 13 points. Michigan State, a big old goose egg. Indiana, 7. Minnesota, 10. Nebraska, 7. They're shutting teams down, and they're not letting teams get into games.
Yeah, and you're going to look for matchups if you're Penn State, because the secondary is also very good, led by Will Johnson. Josh Wallace, the UMass transfer, figured he'd have a good year, and he's been sound for them. In the slot, Mike Sanders still. Figured the secondary could really grow, especially with him, coming into his zone, finally converting full-time from wide receiver over to that position. He's been phenomenal for them in the slot. Makari Page, he's really kind of struggled at his safety spot. Keon Sabdo's kind of picked up some of the effort. And Rod Moore, he's been a little banged up. So I think this is a great secondary. I've not been all that tested, but I think they're going to be great regardless. Against Ohio State, they certainly give up some yards, but they keep everything in front of them. They don't give up a lot of big plays. Back to the edge rushers for a second, Stewart, Harrell, and Moore. Those guys are going to be going against some really good tackles and pass protection. So I think it's going to be interesting. If they can't generate a pass rush, will they be able to do? I think these tight ends are going to have to be big. Michael Barrett's not the strongest in coverage. Junior Colson is, though. They're just going to have to be able to come down to physical, toughly contested catches. Drew Aller's really going to have to put it on him. It's just one of those games, Nick, where you got to be better than the other guy. Kind of like in the NBA, you see great defense all the time, but guys still score. And I think Penn State's going to have to go with that approach.
They're going to have to find a way to be better than the other guy. I certainly think that's a key to success if you want to win this game potentially for Penn State here. I think this is a good secondary that has some nice pieces. Mike Sinisteri, 21 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 3 interceptions, 4 pass breakups, 3 picks for him, leads the way. Keon Sabb, 3 pass breakups, 2 picks for him, 19 total tackles. Chris Jenkins, 1 interception for him, 20 total tackles. Will Johnson, 2 pass breakups, 2 interceptions, 14 total tackles. Josh Wallace, 4 pass breakups, 13 total tackles. These guys have a good rotational unit here. I think this is a solid secondary that can produce when they need to. I like the numbers I see out of this secondary. And if Eller can't really pass the ball down deep due to good coverage, Penn State could find themselves in trouble. If they can't run the ball and they can't throw the ball deep, they're going to have to really try to take advantage of those short yardage passes and try and pick away at this defense. I think that's the only really key to success on offense is short, middle of the field, get the tight ends involved, and see if you can kind of grind down the Michigan defense like that.
Yeah, 12 interceptions as a team, 4 pick sixes. They've only allowed 2 rushing touchdowns. And in short yardage, you're going to look at guys like Chris Jenkins. Even Kenneth Grant can get involved with his size, 6'3", 340, to slow down on the interior. So it's going to be a pretty favorable matchup, you'd think, for the Wolverines. But, Penn State, they got to be able to stay ahead of the sticks. That's going to be the name of the game for them. Biggest chance for Penn State to win this game is their own defense. They got absolutely obliterated on the ground last season by Michigan, gave up 418 yards. I mean, that was just a flat-out disaster, right? And they turned around and they were just dominant the rest of the season. They were just clubbing teams kind of like Michigan is this year on the ground. I mean, they were angry after that game, Nick. And you're hoping that anger, lives into this game. I'm sure it's still fresh in their mind. Chop Robinson hasn't played since, exiting the first half of the Ohio State game. They're going to need to get him back. The run defense is very sound, though. Mayan Williams was able to have some nice, timely runs to keep Ohio State ahead of the sticks. Overall, they only had 79 yards rushing on 41 attempts. Maryland minus 51 yards rushing. I don't know how many sacks they're able to come up with there. I'll find that out in a second. But they've been dominant against the run. 146 against a physical West Virginia. Ground game in week 1 is the only leverage they've given up on this side of the ball. And no, they've not played the toughest opponents either. So we're not going to sit here and act like, they're off the hook by any means. But they did go up against Ohio State, which seemed to be a pretty good matchup for their rushing defense, and they were able to fulfill that promise. They've only allowed 6 rushing touchdowns in their own right. You're going to have to look at some other guys on this defensive line to step up. Adazia Isaac, 10.5 TFL. Zane Durant's been really good. They're really hoping to get Danny Dennis Sutton going, a former 5-star this year. This team's been phenomenal at forcing turnovers, 10 picks, 10 fumbles. Even if Chop Robinson doesn't play in this game, Nick, I think they're still going to be happy with what they have, especially since we kind of alluded to Michigan having some struggles in terms of efficiency and at times effectiveness. I think this is a good defensive line. They got some nice size, nice playmaking as well. Probably not as deep as Michigan, but these guys can play football nonetheless.
This is a good unit that has some depth, not as strong in Michigan, but this is a good unit. Curtis Jacobs at linebacker, 36 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, plus a sack for him. Abdul Carter, 34 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 3 pass breakups. Kobe King, another solid piece at linebacker, who's a good veteran. 30 total tackles for him, 4.5 tackles for loss. Adiza Isaac, like you said, 21 total tackles, 10.5 TFLs, plus 6.5 sacks, lead the way on the team with that number. Danny Sutman, 20 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. Zane Durant, 5.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 15 total tackles. Chop Robinson, obviously, if he's healthy and he can go, he's a very talented home wrecker who can come in from that left side and cause some nightmares for J.J. McCarthy. This is a very solid Penn State defensive line that has not played a whole lot of great teams, just like Michigan, but they have stood up well for the most part. They held Ohio State to 20 points, a very talented offense. They shut out UMass. They held Maryland to 15 points, got a ton of sacks. So this is a good front seven.
Yeah, Zane Durant's been just an exceptional run defender this year. Dominic DeLuca, he's a versatile player for them at linebacker. Can play slot and whatnot. He's been phenomenal when he's been on the field. Abdul Carter, Curtis Jacobs, these veteran linebackers, they're looking to get payback from a season ago. Top 2 in tackles. I want to look to one of those 2 guys to try and create some turnovers here because you're going to have to. And obviously the trend this year is they've been able to do so. Had one against the Buckeyes. Had another one that ended up getting called back. That was for a touchdown. That really would have changed the landscape of that game. They're going to have something like that. Maybe not for a touchdown or any means. They're going to have to steal some possessions. Going to help their offense out a little bit. And I think those linebackers right there coming off the edge will be, big opportunity to do so. I think the biggest matchup here for them is, they should feel pretty confident playing man in this contest. Again, Michigan doesn't have the greatest of speed in the receiving core. Kalen King, he's terrific. Johnny Dixon, these 2 lockdown corners on the outside for the Nittany Lions. And, they're going to have to play these guys tight. Cornelius Johnson, again, he's a physical pass catcher. Roman Wilson's very nice and tight with his route running. He can really burn you in, these short yardage situations. So if they can bring the emphasis to slowing down that running game, Michigan not having that option to convert on the ground, that's going to be big for the secondary. I think that's the matchup they want. They're certainly, I think, going to be able to create that as well. Cam Miller's been a good corner. Kevin Winston's been terrific. Jalen Reed, Zakar Wheatley. I mean, these are really good safeties as well. I think this is incredibly deep, secondary unit for Penn State, Nick. I'm really liking this matchup they have, and I think it's going to go a long way in deciding this game.
I think this is a good matchup. I do like what they have in the secondary. Jalen Reed, 32 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, a pick, and a pass breakup for him. Kevin Weston, 29 total tackles, 2 pass breakups. Kalen King, 25 total tackles, 2 pass breakups. Johnny Dixon has a pick, 3 pass breakups, 4 tackles for loss, 3 sacks for him. Daquan Hardy, 2 picks for him, 7 pass breakups. He's been really good in coverage, solid player so far this season. Tony Rojas also has a pick. This is a good unit that has some nice players. I think it's a deep secondary unit. We raved about him in the preseason. I think this is a very solid unit that has lived with expectations so far this season.
Yeah, Daquan Hardy's been terrific on the slot. He's also been a heck of a asset on special teams. And Michigan, they've played the fewest plays as well. Penn State, they're pretty healthy on this side of the ball as well. They've rotated a lot, especially in their secondary. So I think Penn State, they have a very good matchup here. They're going to slow down the run a good bit, especially in short yardage. And this secondary is going to be forced to play man coverage against Michigan. And I think they're going to do very well in doing that. Second nationally, takeaways, still going to steal some possessions. Tail the tape, look at these team comparisons. I think Michigan's going to get edge in most of these categories. At quarterback, I'll give J.J. McCarthy that one. Running back, you got to call it even. Wide receiver, you probably call that even as well, but I think Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson, a little bit more polished than the top guys for Penn State, and they have their own tight end, Colston Loveland, as well. Offensive line, pretty clear edge there. Defensive front, this could also be raved even, but I think they're a little bit deeper for the Wolverines. They've had a little bit more impact from those guys. And then linebacker and DB, hard to give the edge at linebacker. Another one where it's pretty closely contested. Same with the back end, but I think I got to give Penn State those edges right there by a slight margin. But I mean, this is like the Ohio State game, Nick. This is as even as it gets. The Big Ten is no joke when it comes to recruiting talent and stacking up these rosters.
Very even teams here. I think this is a very even, fair tailor tape. I think running back, you might want to give it to Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards just on pure merit, but I think this season you could say that there's a toss-up there. I think quarterback certainly goes McCarthy at this point. I like what this tailor tape looks like. These are two very even, talented teams clashing in a very tough environment.
The final thoughts on the prediction. Keys to the game for Michigan: find some more traction in that ground game. Put Drew Aller in some tough situations. For Penn State, got to be better on early downs and create some turnovers. If you go 1 for 15 again on third down, you're just going to lose the game. I picked Penn State in the preseason. I think I'm going to stick with it here. 6.5-point underdog is James Franklin. He's not going to be fired by any means. His seat's very cold, but I certainly think he's going to be starting to hear some noise. New look Big Ten is about to arrive. Morale, it's going to be pretty low if he loses this game at home, right? Kind of a desperation heave. Don't know how creative or how desperate he will be when it comes to, maybe pulling out a fake punt or a fake field goal or something like that. I just think this crowd noise here, I'm not going to label the Michigan distraction as a thing, but I definitely think the lack of efficiency and effectiveness from their ground game this year, it's not going to be any different here. I don't think they're going to explode like they did last season. Again, I think Penn State's still freshly aware of what happened last year, and at home, there's no way they're going to get burned on the ground like that. So I think the things I talked about the whole episode, them being able to create matchups for their secondary, them trying to get in the short yardage situation, that's going to be the toughest test as their offense. What can they do? Confident in the defense's abilities in this one. I think they'll slow down the run game. I think they'll create a turnover or two to help them out. Low-scoring contest, 2017 for me. James Franklin knows this is a big-time matchup for him because considering his record in these matchups, it's pretty pitiful.
It is pretty pitiful, and that's exactly why I'm going to take Michigan here. I think that, James Franklin has not been able to get the job done so far in his career. And he's a great coach. I think they are a fantastic team, but he has not been able to get the wins when he needs to against Michigan or Ohio State for that matter. We saw them lose in blowout fashion last year at Ann Arbor. They lost at home 2 years ago. They've been struggling to get the wins they need to. In 2018, they blew the chance against Ohio State. They've blown other games at home in the past. It's a tough environment. I think I certainly agree with that. I think, it's a tough place to play. I've been saying that forever, but I just think that Penn State does not have enough energy here right now. I think Michigan is facing distractions. I think it will be a high-scoring affair, and there'll be a lot of points in this one, sort of like last year we saw a fair amount of points early on in that game. I just like Michigan here. I think I'm going to go with a team that's better on paper and has the better record so far, but this is certainly a tough game to call. I just don't trust James Franklin in these big games. I agree if he was seat's not hot by any stretch of the imagination. I think he's doing a fantastic job, and Penn State's a great team, but they do want to hit that extra gear. I just don't know when it's going to happen, and I don't think it's going to happen this weekend.
Yeah, Penn State in 2019 won by 7 here at home, and then 2021 they probably should have won that game. So Michigan does not play their best ball, and obviously they've been a completely different team the last 3 years. So maybe you can throw 2019 kind of out the window, but they certainly play up to par at home. And even last year against Ohio State, a game they probably should have won. So finishing these games is certainly going to be hard for them, but they certainly compete when they play in this atmosphere. I'm going to take Penn State here with the upset, stick with my preseason notion of the Nittany Lions getting this one done and creating some, interesting chaos in this conference for sure.
It would certainly add some chaos if Penn State can win this game. Obviously, Michigan, they like to think that they are the ones in the driver's seat right now. Ohio State looks shaky against Rutgers this past weekend in the first half. They got their big clash coming up. The Big Ten's in an interesting spot here with the two unbeaten teams, arguably the best team in the country in Michigan or Ohio State, plus Penn State right there. If Penn State gets a win, they can throw themselves into the fray here and they make this really interesting.
That's it for today's episode, Nick. I appreciate you joining me as always.
Looking forward to a fun matchup at noon.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.